The protagonists in the Assassin's Creed games are often linked with a lot of danger, leading a lot of people to think that they live relatively short lives. I mean, with how much fighting they do and how many Templar lives they take, it's not really much of a shock to think that. However, the reality is pretty surprising, so that's what I want to go over in this video. Before I get into it, yes, I know the title says how long each assassin lived for, and this video will feature characters like Kassandra and Eivor, who are of course not considered assassins, but don't look into it too much, it's just the title of the video. Oh, and I've also included assassins from the spin-offs, side games, and even the Assassin's Creed movie. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Now let's start off with Altair, the very first protagonist of the very first Assassin's Creed game. Altair's life from his birth to his eventual death is one of the more tragic ones in the series. He was quite literally raised to become an assassin from birth in 1165. His entire life was tragic, and it began with a lot of adversity, from his mother dying when he was born, to his father being executed when he was just 11, to watching his father's killer end his own life right in front of Altair, to seeing his wife Maria die in front of him, and then to add on to all of that, his son Seth was killed by the order of Abbas Sophian. It was pretty much a never-ending pile of tragedy for Altair. Throughout the events of Assassin's Creed 1, Altair was around 26 years old, and he passed away at the age of 92 on January 11, 1257, making him one of the longest living protagonists in the entire series. So in terms of an age to die at, I'd say he lived a very long life. It's a shame I can't say he lived a pleasant life, however, but to be fair, at least he did make it to the old age of 92. Some of the assassins and protagonists later in this video barely make it to their 40s, let alone their 90s. I guess Altair must have been living a healthy life, you could say. Whatever he was doing on a daily basis besides assassin activities was clearly working. Now next up after Altair, we now have Ezio Auditore. Oh, and if you couldn't tell by now, this video is going in the release order of each game, and not the order of when they were alive. So if you're wondering where Kassandra is, because she's technically the earliest character out of them all, she's near the end of the video. Anyway, Ezio's life was kind of similar to Altair in terms of tragedy. At the age of just 17, he witnessed his father and his two brothers get executed in public. He also witnessed his family name lose all the credibility, and he even lost his first love twice, to her husband and then to her actual death. But I'd still say Altair's life was more tragic. Anyway, this is not a who has a more tragic life between Ezio and Altair competition. When it comes to how long Ezio lived, well, he lived a pretty long life, similar to Altair. By the end of Assassin's Creed 2, he was 40 years old. By the end of Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, he was 48 years old. And by the end of Assassin's Creed Revelations, he was 54 years old. So I think it's pretty obvious why Ezio is widely loved. That's the impact of having a trilogy, as well as witnessing his literal birth in the first game to his eventual death in Assassin's Creed Embers. In terms of how old he was when he died at the age of 65, which is a relatively old enough age to pass away. You know, now that I think about it, this video is making me question life. Thinking about what age is old enough to die is pretty scary. It's giving me shivers. After Ezio and his trilogy of games, we now move on to Connor, or as he is known by the name Raden. Connor is the son of Haytham Kenway and the grandchild of Edward Kenway. Just like Altair and Ezio, he too had a tragic early life. Can you start to see the pattern now? Assassin's Creed protagonists just love having tragic upbringings. Connor was born on April 4th, 1756, and at the start of Assassin's Creed 3 we play as his 5-year-old self. And then after, it skips about 9 years, making him 14, and then after that, when he wears his robes and also receives his hidden blade, he's around 18. So in summary, by the end of Assassin's Creed 3, he'd be 27 years old. But how long did Connor live for? Well, unfortunately the answer is not that straightforward. You see, the only records of Connor after Assassin's Creed 3 come in the form of Assassin's Creed Reflections, which is a comic that's set in the AC universe. And yes, it is canon. We can see throughout Reflections that he appeared to live a happy life, and even had a wife and a few children. But here's where it gets pretty interesting. There was a section in the Abstergo handbook that displays the sad lonely death of Raden, where it states that he died a sad lonely death after his wife left him. But that was eventually confirmed as not true, and simply Abstergo propaganda. So whatever the case may be, nobody really knows how long Connor lived for. Whatever you see on YouTube videos or Reddit forums are simply not true. I just wish Ubisoft explained Connor's final story more, rather than leaving it pretty oblivious. Now moving on from Connor, we now have Aveline from Assassin's Creed Liberation. I've seen quite a few comments saying why don't I ever talk about things related to the spin-offs, so here it is. Aveline was born on June 20th, 1747 and was an assassin of French and African heritage. Now what's interesting is that it says she was born from 1747 to 1830, meaning that she would have been 83 years old when she died. Now whether that's true or not, I do not know. But other than that, how or when she died is not mentioned anywhere except for what I just showed you. At the age of 10, her mother disappeared. At the age of 12, she was trained by the assassin Agathe to become an official member of the Assassin Brotherhood. And then the events of Assassin's Creed Liberation pretty much begin when she's 18 years old. So yeah, if we're talking about how long she lived, the source that I got my information from suggested that she lived for 83 years, which to be fair is a great age to die. How she died though is still unknown. Oh boy, now this one is low-key hard to talk about because of how tragic it is. I've even made a whole video dedicated to what happened to Edward Kenway after Black Flag. Anyway, Edward Kenway pretty much lived up to the age of 42, which unfortunately is a pretty young age to die, especially for somebody with the presence as Edward Kenway. He's the grandfather of Conor Kenway and also the father of Haytham Kenway. Edward was born on March 10th, 1693 in Swansea, Wales. He definitely had one of the more adventurous lives in the series compared to others. However, this aspect lies in the fact that he lost pretty much everybody that he cared about, including close friends, and only discovered the assassin life towards the end of Black Flag. After the events of Black Flag, he pretty much settled down, married a woman and had children, but sadly at the age of 42, which once again is not old at all, he was murdered in his own home and betrayed by a man named Reginald Birch, a man he had once called a close friend. So yeah, sadly he lived a short life with only 42 years to his name. Moving on from Edward Kenway, we now have Adewale from Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry. Adewale was of course a quartermaster and kind of a second-hand man on the jackdaw for Edward Kenway. He was born in 1692 and sadly died in 1758 at the age of 66.
Execute Order 66.
I'm sorry, I just had to play that, even though it is completely out of context. Anyway, 66 years old is a pretty solid age to die. However, how he died is one that will always get me in the feels. Especially seeing that he was killed by Shay, a character that a lot of us like. And it is disappointing how Adewale went down so easily. Granted he's aged, but considering he was a master assassin, it's a bit disheartening. You see, I have a liking for Shay, and I get why he joined the Templars. The colonial assassins in their ruthlessness tampered with precursor temples that were crucial to the world. The assassins' actions led to the deaths of thousands of innocent people in Haiti and Lisbon. However, I was very disappointed in the way Adewale was handled. As the protagonist in Freedom Cry, somebody we played as and grew fond of, seeing him cut down like that kind of felt like losing a part of ourselves. But regardless of this, 66 is a relatively decent age to die. It's just the mannerism of how these characters are killed. Now speaking of Shay killing Adewale, we now have Shay. And yes, I know he's not an assassin, but who cares? It's just a YouTube title. Shay Cormac was born in 1731 and was a former assassin turned Templar during the 18th century. In terms of how long he lived for, well, sadly that's unfortunately unknown. I guess you could say he died when he was no longer able to make his own luck. You may assume that someone who betrayed the assassins and turned against him would face immediate retribution from them. However, that's not how things unfolded. While the exact details of Shay's death remain unknown, when I googled his age at death, this was the first thing that appeared. It says that he died at the age of 83, but I don't know if that's true, to be honest. I guess it's just another case of Ubisoft abandoning another story and character. However, the whole 83 years old thing could potentially be a plausible scenario. I say this because he lived long enough to train not only his own son, but also his own grandson. This is all documented in Book 1 of the Last Descendants trilogy, which features Shay's grandson Kujal Cormac in New York during the draft riots. Let me know your thoughts about this in the comments. There's a lot of theories out there, but I don't think anybody knows for certain. Now moving on to Arno Dorian, the protagonist of Assassin's Creed Unity. Arno was born in August 26, 1768, and despite the amount of tragedies that befell his path, he certainly stayed on the assassin path. He was 8 years old during the prologue, 20 or 21 at the start, and then the mid-20s when the game ended. But in terms of how old he was when he died, well, nobody knows. At the end of Unity, his fate is uncertain, but we do know that in the Dead King's DLC, he declares himself an assassin, which might indicate a potential return to the Assassin Brotherhood. So it's plausible that he just could have reconciled with them later. The Assassin's Creed wiki does not provide any explanation for an age or date of death, but it does mention that by October 17, 1794, he rejoined the Brotherhood and worked with his fellow assassins, and then 16 years later after that, in 1804, he prevented an assassination attempt on Napoleon, and then after that it's pretty much empty. There's just a gap in recorded events. Beyond 1808, there is quite literally no record of Arno's whereabouts or where he was during the years after. I've seen one Assassin's Creed YouTuber mention that he lived to the age of 87, but I don't think there's any concrete proof for that. So yeah, all we can do is speculate at this point. Okay, now these next 3 assassins are ones that are not featured in the mainline games, but rather in the Assassin's Creed Chronicles video games. I recommend playing them, by the way. They're pretty short but fun, especially Chronicles China. And speaking of Chronicles China, let's talk about Shao Jun and how long she lived for in Assassin's Creed. So Shao Jun is a Chinese assassin, and she made her first appearance in Assassin's Creed Embers, seeking guidance from the former assassin Ezio Auditore in 1524. She was born on November 7th, 1505, making her 21 years old during the events of Chronicles China. In terms of how long she lived, well, that's not known sadly. On the Assassin's Creed wiki, it says that Shao Jun obtained the title of Mentor, and by 1567, she was a wise elder who shared her knowledge to the young recruits of the Assassin Brotherhood. So she did live a pretty long life. The exact age, however, is unknown, but it's confirmed that she did live either for 62 years or more. I do wish that she got her own mainline Assassin's Creed game instead of a 2.5D game like Chronicles China. She's definitely one that deserves it. She's even got one of the coolest hidden blades I've ever seen, being the foot blade. Now next up after Shao Jun, we have the next Assassin's Creed Chronicles protagonist being Arbaaz Mir, who a lot of people don't actually know is the father of Henry Green from Assassin's Creed Syndicate. Anyway, Arbaaz Mir was born in Kashmir in northwestern India during the early 19th century to a Muslim family. This is probably one of the only characters in this video where the information regarding his birth, his age, and so on is very limited. Like seriously, it's hard to find any trustworthy information about him. All we know is that he was an assassin that was active during 1839 to 1841. We can also dive into the Assassin's Creed Brahman novel that focuses on Arbaaz Mir, and in that novel it suggests that he was in his 30s during the events of Assassin's Creed Brahman, possibly in his 40s during the events of Chronicles India, and in his 60s during the events of Assassin's Creed Underworld, which is another Assassin's Creed novel. So we can perhaps come to the conclusion that he was over 60 at least, but sadly I cannot deduce a specific age. Okay, so for the last protagonist of the Assassin's Creed Chronicles games, we now have Nikolai Orelov. This particular character is probably the least known in this entire video, but it's one that is still quite interesting nonetheless. Nikolai Orelov is the protagonist of Assassin's Creed Chronicles Russia, and he was born sometime in the 19th century and was a member of the Russian Brotherhood of Assassins during the late 19th and early 20th century. Nikolai played a very important role in notable events like the Borky train disaster and the Tunguska explosion. Oh, and he also led the pursuit for the imperial scepter of the Russian royal family. So it's clear that he played a lot of important roles during this time. However, his death came in 1928, but since the date of his birth is unknown, his age can only be estimated. And this image on screen is the exact moment he was shot and killed. And if you take a look at his appearance, it's easy to make the assumption that he was perhaps in his 60s or over. He also did have a young son named Innocenti. If I was to take a wild guess, he would be 60 years old for me. Okay, now that we've established the 3 main protagonists for the Chronicles games, let's dive back into the mainline games. How long did both Jacob and Evie Frye live for? Well, their specific age is one of the more confusing ones in the video. Of course, since they were twins, they were both born on November 9th, 1847 in Crawley in the United Kingdom. Now, a lot of people think that Jacob Frye was killed by Jack the Ripper, but that's not the case. So, in 1868, we know that the Frye twins successfully liberated London, which is what the events of Assassin's Creed Syndicate is. Well, in 1888, which is when Jack the Ripper came to the city of London, that's where a lot of people thought Jacob was killed by Jack the Ripper. Fast forward to 1914, which is a whopping 26 years after the Jack the Ripper, both Jacob and Evie was removed to the safety of the countryside because of the outbreak of World War I. 2 years after that, in Lydia Frye's database entry, it states that both the Frye twins are alive as of 1916. There is no specific age as to how long they lived for, but knowing that the Frye twins arrived in London at the start of Syndicate in 1868, and then in Lydia Frye's database entry, it says they're still alive in 1916, which is a 48-year difference, and from that, a quick Google search suggests that they're both 21 years old during the events of Assassin's Creed Syndicate. So 21 plus 48 equals 69. Ironic number, right? Anyway, that means both Frye twins are guaranteed to have lived for 69 years or over. The exact age is unknown, but it's safe to say it's probably somewhere between their 70s and 80s. Okay, for this one, let's go into the 2016 Assassin's Creed movie, and the main protagonist in that movie is Callum Lynch. Born on the 21st of October 1979 in New Mexico. In 2016, being the sole remainder of the De Nerha bloodline, Callum was actively pursued by Abstergo as part of a Templar scheme to locate a particular Apple of Eden associated with De Nerha. Basically, he was captured and was forced to participate in the new Animus 4.3, reliving the memories of his ancestors. His death, or how long he lived for, is one that's not mentioned at all in the movie, but Amar Azaizia, who is the head of Assassin's Creed content at Ubisoft, confirmed that Callum Lynch does in fact die. I mean, that's pretty obvious, right? Everybody dies. But he also says that they'd be making a novel called Dark Files, which will explain who, where, when and how Callum Lynch was killed. Funnily enough, the release date says September 2019, but it's currently almost 2024 and it's non-existent. So I guess it's up to us to just take a wild guess as to how long he lived for. And since he was born in 1979 and the setting of the movie takes place in 2016, that would make him 37 in the movie. But I have nothing to go off that will let me determine how long he lived for. Now next up, we have Bayek of Siwa, one of the best characters in this franchise in my opinion. Bayek was born around 85 BCE and was also known by the alias Amun. He served as one of the last Magi of Egypt and played an important role as the co-founder of the Hidden Ones alongside his wife Aya. In terms of how long he lived for, well, that's unfortunately left in ambiguity. We do know that at the start of Assassin's Creed Origins, when Kenway was killed, Bayek was 36 years old. By the end of Origins, he was 42 years old, and then even after that, by the end of the Hidden Ones DLC, Bayek is roughly around 47 years old. So we can confirm that he lived for 47 years, which is more than Edward Kenway at least, but to determine a specific age as to how long he lived for is not possible. But what I can say is that given the existence of mummies for both Aya and Bayek, it's reasonable to assume that both individuals succumbed to natural causes. It's also plausible that, like Ezio, they entered a form of retirement. There's even the possibility that they rekindled their marriage, as indicated by their joint burial, which is a common practice for married couples. While there may not be an official record of divorce in their historical records or in any piece of information, the details are not entirely clear. Okay, now this one is an odd one, and that is Kassandra. You see, unlike quite literally everybody in this video that live lives at certain similar ages, Kassandra's is very unique. It's said that she lived for over 2,400 years. We see her during the Peloponnesian War back in 431 BCE, all the way until 2018 where she hands off the staff of Hermes to Layla Hassan. The staff pretty much gave her that immortality, which is why she lived for so damn long. In fact, she lived for so long that her age surpasses the other protagonists and characters in this video by a long shot. It's crazy to think that Kassandra must have witnessed almost every single event in Assassin's Creed. That means technically she was around when Altair was kicking, when Ezio was kicking, even the latest game Assassin's Creed Mirage. She could have been watching from a distance. I doubt it though, that's just a massive reach. Anyway, yeah, 2,400 plus years is how long Kassandra lived for, an incredibly long ass time. I know that there's quite a few people that are not particularly happy about this aspect, considering it a mockery of the franchise. How do you feel about Kassandra living for that long? I know it's definitely fantastical, but I'm quite interested to hear what other people's thoughts are regarding Kassandra's age. Moving on from that unusual mess, we now have Eivor of the Raven clan. Eivor was born in 847 and was a notable Viking shields maiden hailing from Norway. During the late 9th century, she led raids in what would eventually become England. Eivor was recognized as the reincarnation of the Isu Odin, revered as a god in Norse mythology. In terms of how long Eivor lived for, well, sadly a specific age cannot be determined. There is no information as to when Eivor died, but Eivor was 26 years old when they first arrived in England during the events of Assassin's Creed Valhalla, and then was around 38 years old when they invaded Paris during the DLC in 886 AD. All we know is that Eivor died in Vinland, and Eivor's story afterward is pretty much shrouded in mystery. I doubt we'd ever get to know how long Eivor lived for, as her character is not really a fan favourite, and Ubisoft probably won't go back to anything Valhalla related, thank God. And lastly, we now have Basim, the latest main protagonist to be added into the series in Assassin's Creed Mirage. Basim is kind of in a similar boat to Kassandra, where they both have the staff of Hermes that granted them a very long life. We do know that Basim started his journey with the Hidden Ones at the age of 17, and the story of Mirage begins in 861. This establishes that Basim was born in 844, making him only 33 years old in 877. Which is the end of Valhalla, where he's trapped in the Yggdrasil simulations. From there, he would endure suspended movement for the next several centuries, taking part in numerous calculations and formulating plans for an eventual escape in the future. Fast forward to 2020, Basim managed to escape Yggdrasil and rejuvenated his body. So in terms of how long he lived for, well, we can just do the year 2020, take away the year he was born, making him 1176 years old. Oh, and since the modern day is the present day, and currently as of me making this video it's 2023, we can just add 3 years to 1176, making him 1179 years old. If you're wondering how on earth Basim lived in the modern day without the staff, well, from what I remember, people seem to die specifically when they transfer the responsibility of being the staff spirit to the next person. As an example, Pythagoras went through a similar process with Kassandra in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. So there you have it, that's how long each assassin lived for in Assassin's Creed. Of course, some lived for a long time like Altair, some sadly lived for a shorter life such as Edward Kenway, and some straight up just took the absolute piss and lived for over 2,400 years like Kassandra. It's pretty surprising that the ones that lived for a shorter length were killed off, considering their status as a master assassin or just a tough assassin in general. Anyway, if you did enjoy this video, be sure to hit that subscribe button, and with that said, I'll see you in the next one.